Ginagay. My name's Uncle Alan Phillips. I'm a Kumbanga Guringai Warramai fella, but I also throw in that I am also of Irish heritage and descendants. And the reason why I say all of that together is because my elders, who are no longer with us, taught me that it's good to look at the whole picture of who you are, where everything comes from in the past to make you who you are here today. So, I currently, for the last 3 years, are living back on Dorrigo Mountain, which is on the western edges of the Kumbanga Nation.
Thanks for that, and it's really important that that we position ourselves in country, and where we're sitting here down at Valla Beach, this is an important place for you. Would you like to tell us a little bit about why it's important for you?
Yeah, this particular place has a lot of significance for my learning. Two of my senior elders who were part of Ginnaby and introduced me to Ginnaby even before I knew I was going to be part of the elders group at Ginnaby. We did a lot of talking and yarning, and they shared a lot of stories here. And also too, I also shared with them and sought guidance with the very traumatic things that I'd been carrying most of my life, and how I was seeking how to heal them and move forwards in a better way, in a proper way. So, and the tree behind us has been a very, very dear friend for a long time, providing shade, but also comfort. Because I truly believe that she's listening to us as we're even talking now. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for that. And as we start this conversation, we're thinking about education, and you talked a little bit about then. You mentioned the knowledge sharing from some of your elders and the teaching and learning that you did with them here. Can you talk to us a little bit about the types of education that you've had over your life? We think of education from a Western perspective, but there's so much more than that for us.
Yeah. Wow. I suppose I've had the full circle of education. How would I say? I've, enjoyed, well, not always because it was hard to get me to school, the Western education, but I was more about sports and not so much about mathematics and what have you. History was another topic that I liked, but I knew more about ancient Rome, the Phoenicians, the Vikings and European history than I did about the history of my own people within the educational system as it was then. Went through to high school. In year 10, my career advisor advised me that the army would be a good occupation for me and not to go on to year 12. So I left at year 10 and joined the Army Reserves, which I later, 4 years later, of being in with them, I left because I realised that if I was going to go to war, I was going to go to war to fight a politician or a rich person's battle. And to me, that didn't sit right. So with that, I have been to TAFE College to re-educate myself through some injuries that I've suffered over the years, because I always told that no matter how you get knocked down, you get back up again. And that's put me in pretty good stead. But in regards to cultural learning, or the learning that country can bring us and our elders can bring us, well, that's been part of my life since a child. When I was small, I could get out of any backyard or front yard, either through the gate, over the gate, or under the gate. And this was, 4 or 5 years old, and I would just go bush. And there would be parts in the bush, this is in the Coffs Harbour area, where I'd feel so comfortable, so loved, and so supported. But then there are other times where I would look around and I wouldn't stop running until I got home, even if it was 4 or 5 miles away. I wouldn't stop running until I got home, because I knew now as an adult that was country, and the old people saying I shouldn't be in this spot, or there's danger there. And it's really, really funny about education and the Westminster way of what education is. The different sciences, the sitting in a class, the monkey repeating of the ABC or the 1, 2, 3, and that style of learning. While it fitted for a while, it didn't fit properly. And it was the more I returned into my culture that a lot of my healing started to happen. And for that to happen was through the education of the past. Because, not pulling any punches and being totally honest, I made a lot of mistakes in my life. But then I was taught as a child by those around me. The environment that we grew up in, the trauma of the people around us, especially within my family. And what was taught wasn't proper way. But it was still stuff that stuck in a young child's mind, and as you grew up. So you start enacting these things. You start being these things, even though deep down inside you're somebody different and you feel different, but that then only compounds what you're carrying. And it took a fair while until these 2 senior men came into my life, and it was not long after I suffered post-traumatic stress disorder, working as a Indigenous youth worker. And this was the first time in my life that I couldn't put the pieces back together again. There was nothing to put back. So I was, how would you say, good ground to relearn what I should have been taught and what I wasn't taught. And so the story comes, and the story still unfolds, and the education that is also too, it's not just from our elders, but it's from every single person that we encounter in our life, even if we go down in the morning to a coffee shop or a walk on the beach, we're being educated all the time. And that's part of what we were taught in the old days, that education wasn't just called education, It was a way of life. It was a way of connecting to our environment and living within that environment. Not taking too much, just enough for that day. And so I believe that education is everywhere. We even educate ourselves with our thoughts. And, even right now, I'm being educated, by going back over my story, by the good people around me. And, education just never stops. I remember one story that one of my senior elders, so many stories, he said to me one day, I want to take you and meet a whole heap of elders. And I went, okay, And he goes, but all I want you to do is to sit there and listen and look. And if you talk to, be respectful like you always are. And we'll go from there. And anyway, coming back from that big yarn up with all these elders, he said, well, my boy, what did you learn today? And I looked at him and I smiled and I said, how to be and how not to be. And with that, he just smiled and he said, good, you learnt what I was hoping you would learn. He said, because even people who seem to be doing what you believe is the wrong thing, or acting the wrong way, or being with lateral violence or whatever, they're still teaching you something. And I looked at him and he said, they're teaching you how not to be. So we're always learning, and as I know and as I've been taught, that we learn right up until that last little flicker of light in our earthly bodies before we return home. We learn that, well, for me, we learned that it was all worth it, and that we did good. No matter what, we did good. So, it's a very interesting topic, sure. Education.
And it's one of those topics that has so many different layers to it. And, I'm, really enjoying your conversation around when you think about education, you think about the cultural or the life education that everybody has, and how we apply that. And when we have elders who are mentors and fathers to us in that space, it makes those lessons so much more valued, and we go away and learn that sort of thing. When you think about your engagement now for the last couple of years or more, 4 years, with Ginibi and the elders there, how the two types of education are coming together in some senses. And how do you marry those two together?
I wouldn't call it a marriage, because I think there would have been a divorce long ago.
Potentially, yes.
What I call it is probably two styles that are coming together and learning how to be in relationship with each other. Because other than a nuclear disaster that hits the whole world, we won't really turn back to the old ways. But that doesn't mean to say we can't bring those old ways through into today as new ways, old ways for new days. And that's the old ways that were taught of respect, of love, of compassion, of understanding, and also being able to listen to another person's story, no matter whether they're black, white or brindle, or from Pallades. You know, that everyone's story is important.
Mm.
And again, with my teachings were designed for me specifically by my senior elders, by the men and the women who had walked with me and still walk with me now, but in spirit, and the elders that walk with me now in this earthly plane, is that every single one of us is like a jigsaw puzzle, like a part in a jigsaw puzzle, and that we're all trying to work out where we fit in, where we belong. And it's made harder by not being able to take time to listen to other people's stories. Because when you sit down and actually sit with a person, and as I was taught, the best way to listen is with your mouth shut, is you hear their story, you gain a deeper understanding of where they're coming from and why they're coming from that place. And it's with that better understanding through listening to that other person's story, being educated of that other person's story, that you gain that understanding. And I think understanding of each other and each other's story is something that we've lost. Not on a whole, but on a majority that we've lost. But I would like to see our stories listened to, that people could take time out of their busy days just to stop and listen to someone's story or to share their own story. You know, so yeah.
That's really an important aspect of what we do, is trying to understand each other's story. And I think when you think about Indigenous knowledges in a university setting, you know, people automatically think about that it's a history lesson, but it's not. All of our knowledge is contemporary.
Yeah.
And it's about people understanding how that fits today, and the importance of it today. As you say, where we learn about the history so that helps us to move forward. So knowing what happened last, years and years and years ago, is important for us to move forward.
Yeah, most definitely. You know, because the stories of how things were pre-colonisation and and the story of what it is right up to now due to colonisation and its effects not only on us blackfellas, but also everybody. Everybody is suffering from that. And these are the lessons and the lessons of the past, say 230 odd years. If we look at those in a honest and deep way, well, that's our guidebook for the future.
Absolutely, yes.
That's where we find our roadmap on how to move forwards, by learning, by that education, and the future belongs to us all. But at the same time, in saying that, right here, we're on Gumbaynggirr country, always will be, and to have the Indigenous people sit at the table of decision making all over Australia, and especially locally from wherever that mob's from, is very, very important, because that inequality is what's thrown us all out of balance. And if we look around us, even our beautiful mother, who provides so much for us, you know, our pharmacy, she used to be our pharmacy, our IGA, you know, our classroom, you know, she's hurting. You know, she's hurting real bad. But I had a vision about 9 years ago, where I was sitting around a fire and there were two other people there. One was the Creator and the other one was Mother Earth, and I was crying uncontrollably, you know, right to the sobbing. And the Creator said to me, son, why are you so upset? And I looked at the Creator, but then I turned straight to the Mother and I said, Mother, I am so sorry for what I and my brothers and sisters have done to you. Please tell me how we can help you heal. But all she could do was just look at me, just like a grandmother looks, and you feel that wave of unconditional love flow over you and through you. And then the Creator said, son, what the Mother and I would like for our children is that you heal yourselves, because the Mother has been healing herself since her conception. What is required is for our children to heal themselves. And that was a very, very big learning and education moment on my journey, you know, and has been part of the main building blocks of who I am and where I'm going and how to be, you know. But getting back to your question about the university, while the only perfect thing in this world is our Mother, then the Creator and the old people, everything else, especially humans, we're not perfect. But with the right education and that willingness of education, we can start walking towards perfection. We will never obtain it while we're human, because we were designed to be imperfect, because otherwise, how would we learn? And in saying that with the university, there's always better ways that we can engage. There's always better ways that we can share the story that the lecturers are giving us, or the people who run the university approach us. But that's a human thing, and that's just, for me, an important part, especially as being part of the Ginnibi Elders Council, which is quite funny. This one's for Auntie Sue, because she told me the day that we had the meeting, when the rest of the Elders Council accepted me as one of their own, she was very quick to point out that I was 58 at the time, so it's a few years ago, that I was still the pup of the group, and that I was still wet behind the ears. And I laughed, and Auntie said, "What's funny?" I said, "Oh, not you, Auntie. It's just that I've been told that since I was 3 years old. You know, one day they might dry out," and we all laughed together. But again, that is the learning of my place within the group, you know, and for me to be part of the Ginnibi Elders was definitely not something that I thought would ever happen. But country, the old people and my elders created that pathway to, I suppose, walk in the space that they created when they left. And it's important to me as my own man, but it is also important to the legacy of my elders who went before me to maintain their teachings and to keep that going forward, and to be able to learn. And that's one of the biggest things I've got out of Ginnibi, is the learning from the elders who sit in that council, and hearing their stories and understanding where they're coming from with things. And it's all very, very important. Once again, like I said before, to learn from those around us.
Yeah. The depth of understanding and knowledge that sits in circle with our elders at the Ginnibi Council is huge, which you are a part of, and you bring a depth and an understanding that would be missing or lacking if you weren't there. And I think that's really important, that we all need to understand the importance of each one of our stories, the importance of each one of our participation in that space is really critical to the survival of our people at the university, and I think in some ways the university in itself.
Yeah, no, true, so true, and thank you for your words. But that goes back to, why do we sit in a circle? Because each part of the circle is equal to the other part.
That's right.
But that doesn't mean to say we don't sit with respect. Because I'm still an elder with my L plates on. One day I might get to my peas, my green peas and red peas. But and that's that thing. Even though I'm sitting with the elders and I am an equal within that circle, there is still that humble respect.
Absolutely.
That is. And that's another thing that we're missing in it. I see in a lot of our lives is that humbleness. And there's so many old ways that we could relearn. Again, that education, it's constant. It's learning and relearning. What I know right now was completely different to what I knew before we sat down to talk, because of that relearning. And I believe in some ways that's where the Westminster way of learning puts people in places where they believe that there's nothing left to learn. And it would be really, really good if we could provide some way of educating people that education is, yes, you've passed this and you've got this degree and very well done. But when you leave this door and go out, enter through into another room, well, your education continues.
Absolutely.
And that there's so much more to learn. And again, it depends on that person and their journey and why they're here. Because not everybody is here for the same thing.
That's true.
And learning that allows us to better deal with people and understand them. But for myself, as I understand them, I understand me a little bit more.
And I think that's a key. The more we understand people, the more you start to understand yourself.
Yep, exactly.
And you know, when I did my first degree in social work, I went out in 1980. I finished my degree and went out to work. It took me 4 years to unlearn what I was taught, because what I was taught didn't actually prepare me to work in community.
Mm.
And I think it's really important that we understand what you're saying is that a degree doesn't actually, all it does is open a door.
Mm.
It doesn't necessarily, you haven't been prepared for what's on the other side of that door.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And I suppose that's the best thing about life is, I suppose it's like going on a camping trip. You prepare yourself for every possible occurrence, and it's still not enough. You know, so there's always more to learn. You know, but and I suppose with our students coming through, especially our Indigenous students, I suppose I would also like to offer and gift to them that, yes, it may be scary. Yes, you may be the first one in your family to be doing this, but know you'll be supported. We have a great student support service, Indigenous support service at Southern Cross. Great people who are there to support our students, you know, and also too the lecturers and the elders are also there to support. So with our current and hopefully our new intake, I'm starting to learn some big words being at university, is that doing something new and challenging is always scary at first. But have faith and have belief that this is where you're meant to be, and that the old people and country walk with you. Always. It's just how you build your relationship with country and the old people, just like with anybody else. Because that's one thing, as I said, I would like to offer, because during my dark times, it wasn't just my elders or the people around me. It was country. It was the ancestors, the old people. They supported me through that, through my learning and relearning, through my dark times, until I got to a point where I suppose I could take the training wheels off the bike and keep pedaling myself. But yeah, for our new students coming through, you can do this, and it's important. It's important for our mob. It's important for our future, and most of all, it's important for those students who are stepping up to take that challenge on. And I applaud them. I think that any young Indigenous student, or any student who can take that plunge, even though they're as scared as hell, and still continue on through it, that's resilience. That's true bravery, you know, and courage. So yeah, education's important, not just in a classroom, but out here amongst country, with the mother, all the animals, everything else. That's important, and who we come across each day is important. But what's more important is how we act, react, and respond. Even that is learning and education. Even this old fella's still learning that. Yeah, but yeah, I don't really know what more I can say other than education isn't a place. Education is all around us. Education is within us. And it's there if you want to learn.